I gave a major talk. It was for Boston Community Church. They had 400 people sign up before because I advertised it as an example of the kind of analysis that we used to do in the Central Intelligence Agency with access to all manner of experts. Whatever you needed, military experts, you'd have them, okay? And so what I did was I asked Ted Postal, who knows more about intermediate range nuclear missiles and ICBMs than anybody else I know, and who used to serve as the chief advisor to the chief of naval operations in the Pentagon, and of course is professor emeritus at MIT. What we addressed were these intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Romania and Poland. We did a map, and we showed how quickly they could reach Moscow. Putin said 5 minutes if it's hypersonic. Well, that's what it turns out to be. We showed where the sites were in Poland and Romania and how quickly it could come from Kiev if these things were Ukraine. So I put out all this information, combining what Putin himself had said, and then saying, well, now, Ted, is that right? I mean, is he just blowing smoke? And Ted would give me another graphic showing, well, actually, no, Ray. Look at these sites. The worst is that we could see the signature in Cuba of these medium-range ballistic missiles. The Russians can't be sure what's in those capsules in Romania and in Poland, okay? They can't be sure what's there because there's no signature. They're just closed-up little pillboxes, they look like. At the end of this whole thing, with me being very, very factual, like just the facts, ma'am, and Ted as backup with all these wonderful graphics, there was a comment in the chat that said, why is McGovern justifying the attack on Ukraine? Now, here's the point. A very, very well-respected psychiatrist, he writes to me and he says, Ray, isn't this interesting? You didn't say a word about justifying. You just laid out the facts. And he says you were justifying. So let's parse this. So the facts said to him that the invasion was justified. You didn't say it. The facts said it. One of those reasons I gave to explain, not to justify, to explain why Putin did what he did, was that before Russia invaded Ukraine, 14,000 Ukrainian civilians of Russian stock, so Russian
were killed where I was.
Where you went, right. Now, since the invasion, 4,000 to 5,000 more. Now, these are civilians. This is the town hall. These are the playgrounds, you know. So all I'm saying is this key reason as to why the invasion happened was that the Ukrainian forces were prepared to go into this area of Ukraine, clean out all those Russians that were resisting the regime in Kiev, but had agreed to have a regional autonomy under the Minsk Accords. The Minsk Accords, we know, were where Putin was diddled. What happened was, after the coup that we arranged, or we helped to arrange in Kiev, the Ukrainian army, such as it was, went out to the east.
Wait a second, that we helped, or, directly arranged? I mean, really,
well,
you can't soften that and say that we helped to arrange it.
Well,
it was definitely coming from D.C.
The evidence from that conversation alone shows that we were orchestrating who took over the country. That's clear. It was the most blatant coup in history. So what I'm saying is the Ukrainian army, such as it was, and it wasn't much then, we're talking 2014, goes out to the east because the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, they don't like the idea and oppress them, and so they're resisting, okay? There's firefights. There's a war going on, and nobody is winning, and finally people came to their senses and said, let's talk about this, and then you had the Minsk Accords, okay? The key to the Minsk Accords was Ukraine's promise, and the others people guaranteeing that there would be a regional autonomy granted to Donetsk and Lugansk, and that will be written into a new Ukrainian constitution. Never happened. Never happened for 7 years. Now we know from Angela Merkel, from François Hollande, the head of France at the time, from Poroshenko himself, the head of Ukraine at the time, and, of course, now by Zelensky. We just wanted to buy some time so that we could get the Ukrainian forces trained up to NATO standards and get all the equipment so that we could have, hello? There's no apology there. They brag about it. We did Putin. What does Putin say? All right, folks, I recognize I was diddled. We should have gone on and protected those people at Donetsk and Lugansk when they asked us to in 2014. I'm sorry about that. You have it right. I delayed too long. I ain't going to let that happen again. Nobody's going to diddle me anymore.
But he was totally hornswoggled.
He was. And the idea that he admits it so candidly and still has a 70% approval rate, my God, the guy, I have to tell you that we are extremely fortunate that somebody so restrained and so perspicacious in seeking to defend his country, which, after all, is the first task of a president. We are lucky to have him rather than some crazy person in power in the Kremlin. And I would just add this. I mentioned the word crazy. Well, when Putin was asked in October of last year, he said, how do you explain America's desire to take on China at the same time as they're taking us on in Ukraine? What do you think's going on there? And Putin said, I looked at that. I don't see any logic. At first I thought there might be some subtle, but no, they're crazy. This can only be explained by arrogance and a feeling of impunity, period, end quote. Now, I happen to agree with that, but it doesn't matter what my government thinks, for God's sake, it does matter what Vladimir Putin thinks and what his generals think. If these guys are crazy, if they think that, for example, Blinken got the British to promise to bring missiles in with a range of 150 miles.
Are we on the eve of destruction, Ray?
Yeah, I wish you hadn't asked that question, but here's the deal. The denouement is coming in about 1 month.
What is a denouement? That's a French word. That means the finish.
That's the end, the whole culmination of this drama. And that will be because the Ukrainians will realize that they're out of ammunition, they're out of people. The promised Western support has not arrived soon enough, and the Russians have the option of going all the way west to the Dnieper River, which is the natural divide between West and East Ukraine. At that time, it'll be time to deal. Now, everyone recognizes that. The Chinese, the Pope, for God's sake, the Belarusians, the Brazil president, they all say, look, for God's sake, it's time to have a ceasefire and negotiations. All except Blinken and Nod and that other guy, Jacob Sullivan, okay? So what do? They get the British. You put in these big missiles, that's a red line for Russia. You do it. And so the British say, oh, sure, we do that. You put in the depleted uranium. Depleted uranium on those shells. We know what happens. Burst defects and everything else in the former Yugoslavia, of course, in Fallujah, in Iraq. It's unconscionable that people would poison the soil of Ukraine. Now, if Zelensky lets that happen, he cares less about the Ukrainian people than Putin certainly does. So anyhow, that's what the British are going to do. And worst of all, the British have said nonchalantly, this is Liz Truss when she was the prime minister. She says, I quote, I'm quite ready to use nuclear weapons, even though this might mean a world war or the destruction of the planet. I'm quite ready to do that. It was only after she said that Putin said, we have nuclear weapons too. Don't forget that, please. And we're going to put them on a higher alert. Now, he actually never did that as far as we can discern. But the reminder was there. And if the British carry our water here and make these provocative things like depleted uranium and like these 150-mile range missiles going into Ukraine, there's going to be real trouble because that's the exact opposite of what's needed now.
Why are they doing it, Ray? Why are the British doing this?
Because, the British just do whatever they're told by Blinken. The reason is, and this sounds simplistic, but they're crazy. They're well-heeled, elite people who think we can work our will on anyone. They can't get it between their ears that with China and Russia against us, we can't possibly prevail in Ukraine or anywhere else that's significant. So they're crazy. And when I say that Putin thinks they're crazy, again, I'll say this matters. What is this last-ditch effort, It's crazy. It really is. So what will the Russians do? They'll go to the Dnieper and they'll say, okay, last chance, you're going to negotiate now. And then I think I hope that Blinken and Sullivan will get their heads together and say, all right, well, we gave the Ukrainians 98% of what they wanted, and they couldn't do it. Okay, we'll negotiate.